Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome for joining today, whether you're here in person or via Teams. Before the meeting starts, I need to advise participants of how we'll manage the meeting. And the first thing is mobile phones off, please. If anything goes on, that's 20 quid to the Mayor's charity. So welcome everybody, and whether you're online or in person. Now you need to indicate you want to speak or ask a question by raising your hand and waiting till you're indicated or invited to speak. Don't use the meeting's chat, as this will not be monitored and may be streamed. All microphones and cameras should remain off unless you're invited to speak. You will only get one chance to speak during debate. Please make sure you're close to the microphone when speaking to ensure you are heard clearly. After you finish speaking, please make sure you've turned your microphone off. Please vote by raising your hand, and only those present in the room will be asked to indicate to vote. If you've joined the Teams meeting in the room, please remember to silence your device speakers. So this is a hybrid committee meeting. Welcome everybody. And the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. If there are any technical issues, please bear with us. Please note the normal rules of debate apply, including the requirement for you to be present for the whole of the debate. So if you are absent for any part of the debate, then you should abstain from voting. For clarity, voting is only permitted by the members who are present in the room, and any member joining the meeting remotely is able to participate in the debate, but is not able to vote. So now the first thing is, have we got everybody attending, please, Clark, and those online?
Yeah, I can confirm that we've had apologies from Councillors Barnard and Mackenzie Boyle, and that there are no members of the committee joining the meeting remotely.
That's great, thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is to approve the minutes for the last meeting, and I'd like to move that with one amendment, and that is at the end it says Chairman, and I'd like that amended to Chair, please. Thank you. And so I move the recommendation.
Second, shall I?
Yes, please.
Yep.
Seconded by Councillor O'Regan. Think of the names now, Councillor. Good. Then we need to note declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or affected.
Oh, sorry, we need to vote on the minutes.
Oh, I beg your pardon, that's silly me. Okay, those in favour of the minutes acceptance? Yeah. 6. And those against? And those abstaining? 3. Gosh. Right. Okay, the members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary or affected interests in respect of any matter to be considered at the meeting. Any member with a disclosable pecuniary interest in a matter, in any matter, should withdraw from the meeting when the matter is under consideration, and should notify Democratic Services Officer in attendance that they are withdrawing, as they have such an interest. If the disclosable pecuniary interest is not entered on the register for members' interests, the monitoring officer must be notified in the interest within 28 days. Any member with an affected interest in a matter must disclose the interest in the meeting to the meeting. There is no requirement to withdraw from the meeting when the interest is only affected interest, but the monitoring officer should be notified of the interest, if not previously notified, within 28 days of the meeting. Are there any urgent items of business, please?
No, none notified.
Thank you. So, moving on, item 5, the outline land, the planning application land at Amen Corner South, London Road, Binfield. Can I invite the officer, please, to present?
Hello, can I just make sure that everyone can hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Just share my presentation. Everybody see the plan, please.
It would be great if you could make it bigger, please.
There you go.
That's lovely, thanks.
No problem, do say if you need that to happen again. Right, okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Firstly, I just need to make members aware that the map on page 9 of the agenda is not considered an accurate representation of the submitted red line site location plan. The plan that I am currently presenting on this screen now to you all is the correct representation of the site location plan submitted with the hybrid application. I think that I do apologise. I think there might have been an error in terms of what was actually shown in the agenda, on the committee agenda. Okay, just going to move on to, again, if I need to zoom in, do say. The application site relates to part of the site known as land at Amen Corner South, which lies within the settlement boundary and which is allocated for a comprehensive mixed-use development by virtue of policy SA8 of the Site Allocations Local Plan. The extent of the allocation can be seen from the blue line on this plan. This is this blue line here, and this is the extent of this allocation. The application site lies approximately 2.5 kilometres to the west of Bracknell Town Centre and is within 5 kilometres of the Thames Basin Heath SPA. It extends to approximately 9.45 hectares of mainly open land between Bracknell and Wokingham. The site is bordered by London Road and the Copper Beach Hotel and the former John Knight Leisure Complex, now demolished, to the north, and Buckhurst Moors, a commercial site, to the south. To the west is the Amen 8329, and to the east is Beehive Road. The site abuts a small group of residential properties on Northview and Moor Lane on its eastern edge. Part of the site to the west lies within the administrative area of Wokingham Borough Council, and it's this area here. Land on the northern side of London Road opposite this site comprises the Amen Corner North Urban Extension, where a development of approximately 400 dwellings and a primary school was approved, built out, and is now occupied, and that's roughly here. It goes beyond that. This map showing a key. The Amen Corner Business Park, part of the wider Western Industrial Area, lies to the east of the site. That's here. An area of woodland along its northern boundary separates the site from the Copper Beach Hotel and the former John Knight Leisure Complex, and that's this. The northwest boundary of the site backs onto development fronting the truncated section of London Road, also known to some as Old London Road, and that's this bit here, coming down here. This road includes a number of private houses, of which 2 sites known locally as Norbury and land to the south of Copper Beach House are currently being redeveloped for residential purposes by both Montreux Housing, which is this site here for 21 dwellings, and Taylor Wimpey, and that's this site here, 54 dwellings. The only vehicular access to the site at present is via Beehive Road, Northview and Moor Lane. This is Beehive Road, Northview, and then this is Moor Lane, which also currently serve commercial users to the south of the site, predominantly Buckhurst Moors. In addition, a number of public rights of way across the site, providing footpath links from London Road south to Peacock Lane, crossing both the railway line and the A329. And the footpath runs down like this through the site. As well as the two sites off Old London Road, there is also a smaller development site at Cedar Bungalow off Southview, where 4 dwellings, 2 pairs of semis, and are proposed following the demolition of a bungalow. This application is currently live and undetermined, and this is the location of said bungalow. There is also a live planning application for the redevelopment of Buckhurst Moor site, Phase 1, to provide more modern, formalised commercial facilities to support the current lawful uses of the site. And this is Buckhurst Moor's Phase 1. This is what's in at the moment, and this is Phase 2, but there's nothing in at the moment for that part of the site. This application is a hybrid planning application for the residential-led mixed-use development, comprising an outline planning application for commercial development, use classes A2, financial and professional services, B1, business, B8, storage and distribution, on 0.95 hectare site where all matters are reserved except for access, and a full planning application for 302 dwellings, public open space, a spine road, estate roads, bespoke landscaping and drainage, and car parking. The plan in front of you shows the area of the development site that relates to the outline element of the submission. For the purposes of assessing the outline submission, members are considering the principle of the uses shown along with the details of the access of the spine road. Matters to do with layout, scale, external appearance and landscaping will be picked up at the reserved matter stage should members approve this hybrid application. This plan shows an illustrative concept of what the gateway to the development site from London Road could look like given what is applied for under the outline scheme. However, with the reserved matters associated with layout, scale, external appearance and landscaping to be considered at a later stage, the detail of the outline development is still very much up for discussion. The full planning application for 302 residential dwellings will consist of 65 one-bed flats, 47 two-bed flats, 162 two-bed houses, 27 three-bed houses, and 1 4-bed house, of which 25%, that's 76 dwellings, will be affordable and will be pepper potted throughout the site. The proposed tenure mix will be 23 shared ownership, and it's shown on this tenure plan here, is marked in purple, here, 32 affordable rent, and they are in orange, here, and here. And social rent, there are 21 units, and that's in dark blue. The number, mix and locations of the units proposed have been accepted by the Council's Housing Enabling Officer and my colleagues in the local plan team, and as such are not considered to conflict with South Policy SA8. The developer will also provide the following: the required spine road, and I'll just zoom in a little bit. The required spine road, which is this, with associated junction works linking the site with other areas of the allocation and the wider strategic highway network. The associated development has been fully traffic modelled, bearing in mind what it would provide, how the site would be accessed, and how this would affect the wider strategic highway network. The local highway authority have provided no objection to this. The required pedestrian and cycle links, an example of one of those is one that runs along the southern boundary of the site, so it's a pedestrian cycle link, connecting other allocated sites and the wider Binfield, Bracknell, Wokingham areas. The local highway authority are happy with the planned pedestrian cycle access strategy in that it results in a site that will be easily accessible by foot and cycle, connecting to the wider allocation and beyond into Binfield and Bracknell. They will implement highway works within their land that will go towards a package of improvements. Both this application and the Buckhurst Moors application seek to deliver regarding the way Northview and Moor Lane will operate in the future. This would involve the stopping up of Northview from Moor Lane, the inclusion of a new access off the Spine Road, and the inclusion of a turning head. This, along with appropriate signage, will prevent current levels of commercial traffic accessing the commercial site known as Buckhurst Moors via Northview and Moor Lane, which is currently substandard in terms of its width and lack of pedestrian footpaths. The local highway authority fully supports this. They would also provide a spacious, privately managed area of open amenity space for walking and playing, as well as providing a softer edge to the development towards the A329. The development sites within, the development sites within Woking and Borough. The council's Parks and Countryside Officer supports the open space strategy. The developer would also provide required safeguarding of land for educational uses. Currently, there is no need for a primary school to serve 302 units, as there is a surplus of places within the borough. However, the local education authority expect to see less of a surplus in the future when updated figures are received. Due to the lack of certainty as to when this allocation will be delivered, what the housing build rate will be, and that the current surplus in primary school places is predicted to decrease, a Section 106 obligation will be required to safeguard secure land for the provision of a primary school. If within a period of within a 10-year period, the land in question is required for educational purposes, then a separate planning application would be made by the local education authority to build out the required primary school. The local education authority are satisfied with this approach and will be involved in any Section 106 discussions. Just zoom out. The developer would also provide a comprehensive surface water drainage strategy accepted by the lead local flood authority that not only takes care of the development's discharge, but also now addresses concerns raised by Network Rail, a non-statutory consultee for this development site. Officers are aware of the decision of the council in acknowledging residents' concerns about sewage discharges into watercourses, and of its consideration recently by the Overview and Scrutiny Commission in terms of resolving to work with other local authorities across the Thames Valley to challenge these failures. With respect to individual planning applications, Thames Water has a statutory duty under the Water Industry Act to provide sufficient sewage capacity for the new development where it doesn't already exist. The flood risk assessment submitted with this application confirms that Thames Water has indicated that off-site network reinforcement will be required to accommodate foul flows from the full development, and the developer is in ongoing discussions with Thames Water to identify the threshold of development at which such reinforcements will be required in order that Thames Water have sufficient notice of the delivery of units on this site. Any upgrades will be implemented in advance of occupation above the identified threshold in accordance with the statutory obligation. The developer will also provide remediation of any potential land contamination, including invasive species such as Japanese knotweed. The council's environmental health team and biodiversity officer are happy with that, subject to conditions, should consent be granted, that these issues can adequately be addressed. The developer will provide SPA mitigation. SANG capacity will be provided at Tarman's Copse, which is a SANG located at Jennetts Park, accessible via the public rights of way under the A329, and could also be located at or on another SANG capable of serving the site in line with our policy and guidance. As the competent authority, the council has a legal duty to ensure that the integrity of the Thames Basin Heath SPA is not harmed, and we must ensure that there is sufficient SANG capacity to mitigate all relevant approved schemes. We do this by operating our SANGs on a catchment basis in line with the South East Plan Policy NRM6, which means development over 10 dwellings must be within 5 kilometres of a suitably sized SANG, which in this case will be Tarman's Copse. We have fully assessed the proposal through the Habitat Regs assessment processes in line with our strategy and agreed with Natural England, and we are happy that as long as the mitigation is secured by way of a Section 106 obligation, then the competent authority would have no objection to the development. The plan in front of you shows in colour the 4 different proposed character areas where they are located on the plan, on the site. So you've got the Amen Corner Gateway character area in orange, you've got the residential core in pink and here, Woodland Walk character area either side of the Woodland Walk in blue, and Forest Views character area here in green, overlooking the open space. The purpose of the Amen Corner Gateway character area is to address the new Spine Road, the vehicular entrance to the site, and land adjacent to Copper Beach Hotel. It also addresses the main loop road through the site, linking to future development located to the south. Located within this character area, apartment blocks are designed at key nodal points and act as focal points to provide a strong formal frontage and sense of place and arrival. As located on the main roads through the Amen Corner South site, buildings have been provided with large green setbacks to provide an attractive street scene when travelling through the development. Car parking for flats has been located within internal courtyards to the rear of blocks and shielded from the main roads, and side parking is provided for houses. The Woodland Walk character area comprises housing fronting and adjacent to a leisure area known as Woodland Walk, which runs north to south through the site. Here, dwellings typically have a large setback to provide a wide open space buffer alongside the Woodland Walk. In addition, car parking has been predominantly located to the rear and side of the dwelling houses, so as not to negatively impact on the character of the Green Walk. All detached units in the area are provided with either a garage or carport. There is also a greater variation in building lines and orientation to the street, with most of the units directly fronting onto green spaces. The Forest View character area can be described as development fronting and adjacent to the large open space area located in the western part of the site. In this location, dwellings typically have a large setback to provide a connection to the open space. Car parking is predominantly located to the rear and the side of dwellings so as not to negatively impact upon the character. All detached units in the area are provided with either garage or carport. The majority of the streets only have development on one side to maximise the number of units which can enjoy park views. The houses have been generously spaced to allow for glimpses of the public open space from the eastern part of the site. And the remainder of the development on the site consists of residential core, and it is a higher density compared to the other character areas. In this location, dwelling houses typically have reduced setbacks compared to other areas. Parking to the front of units and the side is common, with very limited use of garages and carports. Frontage parking is designed to accommodate planting in order to minimise the visual impact of the car. The following 3 sets of street scenes provide an idea of how the development will address what is to be a challenging site in terms of levels. I'll just slowly just rotate through those 3. We can always come back to those later. You can clearly see the level differences. This is the final plan. All of these plans have been online. Dwellings will be 2, 2.5 and 3 stories in height. There would also be apartment buildings located within the Amen Corner Gateway character area where there would be predominantly 3 stories in height, except for one apartment building to the north of the proposed Spine Road that would be 4 stories. Please note that although the 4 character areas will be defined by the type of house, density and external finish of the materials, the materials are something that will be conditioned to be approved should consent be granted. Members are directed to page 1 of the supplementary report for updates relating to this item, which include amendments to the officer's report and recommendation. Amendments to the recommendation include updated condition wording, additional conditions, and updated reasons for refusal should a suitable Section 106 legal agreement not be secured. Members visited the development site and the surrounding area last Saturday. However, for the benefit of anyone unable to attend the site visit and for members of the public observing this evening, I'm now going to run through some photos I took towards the end of July this year. First photo, this is a view of Amen Corner North development and London Road looking northeast. This is a view of Amen Corner North development on the right and the vehicular exit from what's known as Old London Road onto London Road Real down towards the Copper Beach roundabout and Wokingham Borough. This photo shows the location of where the proposed Spine Road will link up with the London Road, with the Copper Beach Hotel in the background and an operating guest house to the right of the image. Again, this is another photo showing the location of the proposed Spine Road access. This photo shows Old London Road, or the truncated London Road, looking southwest past the vehicular access to the Montreux Homes development site, and that's this site here. This is the London Road entrance to South East Water treatment works, sandwiched between the Montreux Homes site and the Taylor Wimpey site. This is the Taylor Wimpey development site in the distance off Old London Road. And then this is some of the existing properties on Old London Road. This is a view from the public right-of-way on Persimmon Land, looking north towards Amen Corner North. So this is Amen Corner North and London Road's in between. Sorry, skip one. Okay. This is a view from the public right-of-way on Persimmon Land this is a view south from the same public right-of-way towards the development site with Montreux Homes development site to the right of the image. This is a view within the development site looking southwest along the northern boundary with the Montreux housing site, following the route of the public right-of-way, which continues down this way towards the 329. This is a view of the development site. This is a view of the centre. Sorry, this is a view within the centre of the development site, looking northeastwards towards the Montreux Home development site to the right, which, if you look really carefully, you can see there's a house behind this tree. That's the Montreux housing site. And also the Taylor Wimpey development site to the left of this image. And you can just see a little bit of the roof there. So this is where these two sites link in with the Amen Corner site. This is a view southwest from the site towards Landworth in Wokingham Borough and the proposed open space of public value. This is a view from the same location looking northwest towards properties on Old London Road within Wokingham Borough with the Copper Beach mast in the background. That's here. This is a view from within the centre of the site looking northeast towards Copper Beach Hotel. This is a view of the upper slopes of the site facing northwest towards the Copper Beach mast again. And this is a view southeast from the centre of the site towards Bracknell Town Centre in the distance. And again, you can just see Bracknell Town Centre there. And I believe that's Winchester House. Maybe wrong, but I think that's what it is. This is a view northeast up Beehive Road towards John Knight Way from the top of the north view where the Spine Road will connect. This is a view of the junction with Beehive Road, South View and North View. This is South View and that's North View going down there. And this is a view of North View This is a view northeast of North View, showing the existing residential properties on North View. This is a view of North View from the top of Moor Lane. And you can see here the sort of standard of the road at the moment that's there. This is a view of the vacant golf driving range building where the land would be safeguarded for educational purposes. This is a view of the bottom of Moor Lane showing the Sanctuary Bar and Cafe. And finally, a view along the end of Moor Lane towards Buckhurst Moors commercial area, which is here. To conclude, the development, when considered against SOUT Policy SA8, is considered acceptable in principle. The development is not considered to prejudice any other sites located within the allocation from coming forward for future development. The local planning authority is not currently able to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites within the borough. The delivery of housing on this site goes some way to meeting the unmet need, and as such is a material consideration in the determination of this application. There is an outstanding committee resolution to approve a similar scheme, albeit in outline form. The proposed layout of the mixed-use development, including 302 dwelling units, is considered to respond well to the constraints of the site, for example, providing level access to each of the dwellings and apartment buildings. Members will be aware from the site visit that the allocated site is affected by challenging levels. Constraints for this site also include retaining as much of the existing woodland features as possible, the need for a bespoke drainage and landscape strategy, and the need to provide the required linkages with the wider SOUT Policy SA8 allocation, all of which this submission achieves. The proposal involves the formation of 4 character areas that assist in responding well to the site and policy constraints, and at the same time create a sense of place. The architectural design of the proposed dwellings and apartments within the 4 different character areas, with the use of specific external finishes, further develops an external appearance that is sympathetic to the wider allocated area, yet at the same time creates a sense of place. The applicant proposes a large area of privately managed and landscape open space for recreational and visual amenity purposes. This will not only benefit future occupants of this development site, but others that will be linked with this site from both Binfield and Wokingham. The proposal is not considered to result in any adverse impacts upon the amenity of both existing and future occupiers. Instead, it provides a betterment in the way North View and Moor Lane will function and serve existing residents in the future. This is planned to take place in combination with the redevelopment of Buckhurst Moors. The Highway Authority is satisfied that development can safely accommodate the number of residential units and commercial uses in a way that links safely with the strategic highway network as envisaged by SOUT Policy SA8. These links include pedestrian cycle routes throughout the site, providing access to Binfield, Bracknell and Wokingham via other development sites that are being built out or will be delivered as part of the SOUT Policy SA8 allocation. The Council's Waste and Recycling Officer is happy with the proposed site-wide waste strategy in terms of bin storage and positioning. The proposal is also considered to appropriately address biodiversity and drainage issues, Thames Basin heat SPA mitigation, general infrastructure requirements, renewable energy policies, subject to conditions and suitable obligations secured by way of a Section 106 legal agreement. As such, it is recommended that members approve this scheme as per the recommendation set out in both my report and the supplementary report. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Officer. This application has started in 2004 and now we're nearly 20 years on. So things have changed in all sorts of ways as this has gone on, and lots of work has been done to bring it up to date and keep it going. And I believe the officer has responded to the various representations we've received. It's now time to ask questions, please. Anybody want to ask the officer any questions of fact? Councillor Karim, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the officer thoughts on the steep gradients in the site. The impression given that there isn't a perfect solution to that. Obviously, disabled persons should have full access to the different areas of the development. Are there any anticipated no-go areas on the site? And also, to what extent was disability taken into consideration?
Thank you.
Would the officer like to comment?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm just going to share the plan again. I think I've mentioned in my, oh, blimey. Have I shared it? Sorry, I've shared the whole screen. Let me stop that. Sorry about that. I apologise. I just want to share the document. Got a bit carried away. Right. Okay. Here we go. So I think in my report, I've actually mentioned certain areas within the site.
Sorry, officer,
Oh,
we can't
hello?
see anything on the screen. Oh, there we are. It's come through now.
Oh, sorry, there was a bit of a
That's all right.
delay. Thank you. Yes, sorry. In my report, I do mention specific areas where there are footpaths that aren't. They are sort of, I think, at a gradient of 1 in 12, when we would look at 1 in 15 as being suitable. I believe that this is one of the routes here. This bit here. Actually, this is the one. It's on both sides. That's all. And what I've done is I've acknowledged that yes, the site is heavily affected by levels, and we've done a lot of work to get where we are now, with just this area being slightly problematic. However, there are alternative routes. There's a right of way footpath that goes round to said open space here. So I don't believe, and I disability and I think Disability and Discrimination Act, that has been looked at and considered throughout the formation of this application to try and make best use of what we've got. But we've got to a point where a couple of the footpaths around this area aren't great, but there are alternative routes for those people should they need them to circumnavigate the site down to the area of open space. And they aren't really too sort of out of the way at all. They, people may choose to go that way anyway. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Councillor Karim, do you have a follow-up question?
No follow-up question, just thank you for the further information.
Thank you. Councillor Penfold, please.
You mentioned this 25% affordable and socially affordable housing. Is it a mixture of apartments, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom houses and 2 bedroom houses?
Yeah, yes, I'll just bring up the 10-year plan. Works. So it's being a bit slow. Here we go. So you've got a mixture throughout the site. Can you see that plan there? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, just making sure. I think it's a bit of a delay. So basically, you've got the purple, the blue, and the orange, which make up the suite of affordable housing throughout the site, which is a mixture of housing, different types of housing, and also apartment buildings. So yes, it's well spread within that.
Right. Thank you.
No problem.
Any follow-up? No? Yes, carry on.
It says in the report somewhere that this site will be energy self-sufficient, or it will be generating its own electricity. Is this done with solar panels on houses or in a separate?
Right. It's not a site that's sort of generating energy in a large scale situation. It's really a case of we have policies CS10 and CS12 in this core strategy, which seek to reduce the carbon footprint of development, and then on top of that try to offset the energy demand of the development with the use of renewables, and so and so looking at that, there'll be certain houses in certain orientations, depending on what can and can't be achieved, may have some solar panels, may have some ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. That's something it's going to be conditioned and assessed to make sure that they provide a policy compliant energy scheme, energy strategy. But it's not like there's a plant on there that's generating power for it. It's not quite going that far, I'm afraid.
Right, thank you.
It's sort of mitigating itself, if you know what I mean.
Yes, switch that off. Thank you. Councillor O'Regan.
Yes, Chair. I have a question for the officer. It's a procedural question about how we address the full council motion about the impact of development on infrastructure, in particular sewerage. So in a previous application that we considered last time, there was a condition number 28, no development shall commence until either a confirmation and a scheme for improving existing sewerage. Now, I heard the officer talk to the question of sewerage. So my procedural question is, how do we address the full council resolution, motion on sewerage in these applications? Because I see a variation between a previous application and this one, and I'm just seeking clarification on how we handle that. Thank you.
Can I ask Assistant Director of Planning, please, to respond?
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. The situation that we have is the full council resolution referred to a strategic level approach to tackling the known issues around Thames Water. It did not have specific implications for how we determine planning applications. So that really isn't a matter that we would look at through this committee. Their work may result in implications for our ongoing planning policies, which would then have an implication for this committee, but that's not the case at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Frewer, please.
Thank you. It's talking about the affordable and the social rent properties. Who would administer the rents for these properties, and would the rents be in line with the Silver Homes properties in other parts of Bracknell?
Okay, through you, Chair.
Thank
I'll
you.
give you the best knowledge I know. I'm not an expert in this field, but it would be the registered providers that will be the ones who are actually sort of manage the sites. So that's also maintenance, landscaping around them, as well as the tenants. And I guess they would set the tenancy agreements up. But I have to say I'm not an expert in that field. But the registered providers are the ones that would be the ones who deal with this. They are. I don't know if there's anyone there that might be able to assist with that question.
Thank you. I think Assistant Director has a word.
Yes, my understanding is that where we have identified housing as affordable, it would need to meet the definition of affordable, and for affordable rent that needs to be not above 80% of market rent is the normal definition, if that helps.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Hayes.
Just something I just thought, on the school, that's the 10-year package that we have for improvements for the area. If the school's not built or made, or who owns the land and who will have control of what? Would it come to us in the first place as that land is ours? Just something, because it brings to mind Martin Terra and Forest Park and the Warren and what happened down there that should have had a school.
Thank you. Yes, please. Our legal officer, please.
Yes, through you, Chair. The Section 106 covenants in respect of the school land are still being negotiated. What will happen is that if we do require the school land, it will be transferred to the council, so we will then own the land, but we will have to justify that there is a need at the time So there'll be various obligations in the Section 106 which trigger notices to be served, and depending on what dwellings are delivered and what the school places situation is at that time, would then result in either the school land being transferred to us and the school being built, or not. I would assume it would go back to the developer if we could not justify requiring the school land because our school places were sufficient to meet the needs of this development.
Thank you very much. Any other questions of fact, please? Councillor Karim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one more. It's relating to point 9.88, which talks about this has been with the council for some time, and it's not considered reasonable to require the full 10% biodiversity net gain, 50 units. Please, could the officer elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. Yes, it has been in a long time. Things have changed, so it wasn't a consideration at the beginning. However, we are in a position at the moment where in the near future, it will be mandatory to request 10% net gain in biodiversity. At the moment, we're not quite there in terms of it being mandatory. So we assess each case on its own merits. And we, as well as our biodiversity officers, have come up with the increase in 4 units as being 4% as being sufficient for this case. At the moment, the policy states that a measurable increase or measurable net increase is what we should be achieving, and 4% is a measurable net increase given this site at the moment. Things will change once it becomes mandatory. You'll be looking at 10%, but at the moment we can't ask for that. So there are other considerations that were taken, that were looked at, as well as the fact that it is a historic application on a site that's allocated through a local plan, which is about to be updated as such. So I hope that answers.
Thank you. A further question?
No further question. Thank you for the further information. It's very helpful.
Could you switch off your microphone? Yep. Anybody else for a question of fact? Okay. There was something I was trying to find quickly. Whenever I can. I should put another sticky in there, shouldn't I? No, it's no good. So the recommendation is on page 10 of our report, and the section 11 that it refers to with all the subject to conditions is on page 42 of the report. And it recommends that the Assistant Director Planning be authorised to grant planning permission subject to conditions set out in section 11 of the report, and the section 106 agreement in relation to the Thames Basin Heaths SPA, highway matters and any future educational needs, biodiversity net gain, reptile mitigation and SUDS monitoring fee, associated infrastructure contributions and an overall obligation monitoring fee. And please note there are amendments in the supplementary report to section 11. Can I invite comments? Sorry. I need to move the motion for acceptance of the recommendation, please. Who's seconding?
And Councillor Regan, can I second the motion?
Thank you. Although, oh no, we can't. We've got to have a discussion now. Councillor Hayes.
Yes, it's an observation. The package, I understand we have to commit to housing if we haven't met our numbers and such. I still worry about the position of where this is because of the traffic, we'll call it. But it's something else I was looking at, and I would ask the officers to take this into consideration when, because this is like Topsy, these sites are coming out from everywhere. Longshot Lane, is the possibility, and in the future, that the officers consider the pressure that is going to be put on our collection of waste and the dispersal of it. Not just, I complain about the width of the roads and getting the trucks up and the parking, but it's also now the amount of waste being taken to Longshot, because you must remember, we share that site not only with Wokingham, but ourselves. And I am very concerned that this is so close to there and the movement of so much traffic. Please take into consideration when officers with this. Okay, I do have concerns. We may even ask for some 106 conditions towards that site of Longshot, because we do need to update it.
Okay. Any further comments on this? Would you like to, Councillor Collins?
I would just like to add, in terms of the schools, I am very concerned if the school on site doesn't come forward, that we will end up with a large number of primary school children who may have to be spread throughout the borough to accommodate them, and the transport that will cause in terms of traffic, more traffic around the borough, whereas having a local school, obviously there will be a proportion of children who can walk to school. The mix of houses indicates, well, certainly to me, I may be wrong, that there will be families with small children living at that site.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Any further comments from anyone? Very quiet today. In that case, we've had a discussion about disabled access, energy, biodiversity, foul drainage, and affordable and social providers. The school is a particular concern, but we know that it's not required at the moment. And traffic collection of waste and availability of space for said waste at Longshot Lane. Since we got no further comments, gone. Yeah, but there's no further comment we can make. Please, would you indicate if you're in favour of the recommendation? Any against? I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much. So, moving on swiftly. Item number 6. May I ask the officer to give us a presentation about 19 Torfield, please?
Good evening, Chair. This is Basha Polnick speaking, and I'm the presenting officer for this item this evening. I'm just bringing it up on the screen, the presentation. It seems to be a bit slow. Right, I'm afraid, oh, here we go. It's gone to full screen now. So this application relates to, hopefully you can see that.
We can. Could you make it a bit bigger, please?
Okay,
Should I say zoom in, please?
that's fine. This application relates to a 4-bedroom detached dwelling with a detached garage to the side. And the proposal is for a 2-storey side extension and a single-storey front extension following the demolition of the garage. So these are the existing floor plans. So we have the garage here to the side, and we can see the relationship with number 20. And then this is the first floor layout, which currently has 4 bedrooms. I'll just minimize this. And here we can see the existing elevations. So this is a front elevation with a garage, the side elevation with the garage to the side, and the rear elevation. Whilst we have this plan up at the moment, I just wanted to draw to the members' attention that although the relationship with number 20 is correct, the plans don't represent the roof form of number 20 at the moment. So number 20, as we will see in the photograph later on, actually has a gable to the front rather than gables to the side as the application site. And also we will see in the photographs that there are level changes, which we saw on site on Saturday. So number 20 is approximately 0.7 of a metre higher than number 19, the application site. Originally, 11 objections plus an objection from the Bracknell Town Council were received. The proposal has been amended during the course of the application to address the concerns raised, and as such, 3 objections have been withdrawn. So this is the proposal as it was originally submitted, with a 2-storey side extension being in line with a front elevation and the front porch. And then this is the revised application. So the amendments include setting in the extension 1 metre from the boundary from number 20 and setting back the extension from the front. The extension would not project beyond the existing rear elevation of number 19, and overall the amendments have reduced the bulk and the massing of the proposals, which are now considered to be acceptable, both in terms of its impact on neighbouring occupiers and the design. So here we have the rear elevation and the 2 side elevations. So here we can see the fact that it's set in from the existing front elevation. These are the proposed floor plans. So again, we can see the relationship with the nearest property, number 20, and the extended bedroom at first floor level. And here we have the existing street view. So as I was explaining, number 20 is built at a higher level than the application site, and we can see the gable. So therefore the ridgeline runs from front to rear, as opposed to side on the application property. And also it's worth noting that the adjoining the property on the other side, number 18 Torfield, has a similar extension to that proposed. In terms of parking, a plan has been received showing 3 parking spaces which can be accommodated on the site. And as such, the Highway Authority raised no objection. The supplementary report contains an additional condition requiring the additional parking to be constructed of permeable materials. So therefore, the recommendation is for conditional approval, subject to the conditions on pages 62 and 63 of the agenda, plus the additional condition contained in the supplementary report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of fact for the officer, please? Councillor Regan, thank you.
Through the chair, I'd like to ask the officer, could you confirm that there will be a access to the rear through the side, the right-hand side as you face the property into the garden? It's not clear from the plans.
Yes, I can confirm because of the 1 metre gap, there will be access to the rear garden.
Thank you. Any further questions, please? Councillor Hayes.
Yes, that brings up a question, no doubt, because with the parking being now covered, that it does cover for four bedroom and the 3 parking. It's just the storage. You know my favourite subject, the bin storage. So they would be able to take the bins through to the back, wouldn't they?
Yes, through the
Yes,
1
that's
metre
fine.
gap.
Okay, no problem then.
Yes.
Thank you. Any further questions for the officer, please? No? Then I'd like to refer you to the recommendation on page 56 of the report, that the planning permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in section 11 of the report, which is page 62 of our agendas. Would you like to comment, please?
Do you need a second there?
Yep, I need to propose propose that, and
And I will second.
thank you, Councillor Regan. Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Any question? I know. Any comments? Yeah. Councillor Hayes, thank you.
Only it was worth going to the site visit because it gave us the opportunity to see that others had been able to attain exactly what this was happening on the planning application. And it was worth that visit for that alone. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. That was. Councillor Regan?
Well, actually, I have to disagree with that. I had a look around and I was looking under section 4.5 about side extensions. And I do have a concern about the rhythm of the street frontage, because I couldn't see a similar development close by. Most 4-bedroom properties which had converted their garage had a different design, and most which had an extension had retained the garage. So I do have a reservation around section 4.5.1 about the rhythm of the street frontage. It's just my personal opinion. I hope the applicant takes advice. To have such a large property without a garage, that may not be the best way of developing that property in terms of its value for resale in the future. But that's just my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just in consideration of Councillor Regan's point, could I ask, if it's possible, if I can ask the officer to bring the view of the street scene up again that we saw earlier?
Yes.
I'm just interested. It struck me that there was a house next door in that street scene that looked remarkably similar to what was being proposed.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can see that.
Bit of a
It's still
delay,
coming.
not yet.
No.
This time we got fast fibre here.
All right. I have it up on my presentation at the moment,
Here
and it is within the red line of it should be shared.
Lovely.
No, but we can see that. Thank you, Chair. I can see
Thank you.
that neighbouring property does have a garage at the ground level. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, so I'd say that the street scene.
You're only
Yeah,
allowed to speak
sorry.
once, sorry. Any other comments, please, from other members? So, that being the case, can I therefore take a vote on those in favour of the recommendation to approve? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you, Clark. Before going on, please can I ask Councillor, we recognise, thank you, welcome Councillor Harrison for coming, but the procedure is that you should sit in the public gallery, please. It's in the council constitution, I believe. It's to make it clear who is a member of the committee and who is not. Then to make the... Yeah, please switch on the count. You'd be invited to, if you wanted to say something, you'd be invited to contribute. The thing is, Councillor, that we're all abiding by the rules that we've been given. And
could you explain what rules these are? Because these are new rules. The convention of this committee has always been that any councillor may attend.
The constitution has changed recently. Legal officer, please.
Not in respect of this matter.
No,
It's always been the case. In the Constitution, there's not been any amendments in respect of this. My understanding is that there was a complaint from a member of the public because it's not clear to them as to which members are committee members and which members are visiting members. So in order to address that complaint, we are following the Constitution, which has always been the case. It's just because we've had virtual meetings, it's been lost sight of. In terms of having voting members clearly visible to the public and those that are not voting members. So therefore, the Constitution says that visiting members who are not voting members need to sit in with the public, and if they wish to speak, they can do so with the chairman's permission.
Thank you for the explanation. I accept that. I think this merits wider debate, but not in this forum. So I will respect the chair and I will withdraw from the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
May I suggest that this be sent to all councillors, what you have there stated, because I've looked it up, and it was only sent by Andrew Hunter to the planning committee members, not to other members. So they would not have been aware.
Can I suggest that you take it to the full council? Thank you.
I'm sure someone may.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's move on to the TPO application. On page 65 of your report, agenda item 7, confirmation of tree preservation order 1393, the land at Sanford Down and at Ford Wells Drive. Could the officer present, please?
Certainly. Thank you. My name is Stephen Chown. I'm the head of the Natural Estate Service, and I look after Parks Countryside, which has the tree service within my remit. I'm just in the process of sharing my screen, so if you will forgive me for one moment, hopefully I can get that up for you to see.
We can see the opening plan.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm presenting this item for my tree service today. It relates to a decision before the committee as to whether to confirm TPO number 1393. I have some materials which I'm sharing on screen to support this consideration. Thank you for confirming that those are visible, and I will try and move through those as I talk mainly to the item. The original report and an addendum report are within the papers, and these represent the core decision that lies before the committee and present a summary of the background and the representations that have been raised. And I'm just looking to build on that information there, not replace it. With your permission, Chair, I will focus some additional time on key aspects of the objections received in more detail. Just ensuring member understanding of some of that information, and also noting that some of that arrived beyond our normal submission dates, but the officers are very happy to include at this point for the committee benefit the information that we have, and also for public comfort that all of the matters that they have raised have come forward. But before I address the objections received, it's essential, I think, for member understanding that I just reiterate the scope of the decision that is before the committee tonight on this item, in that this is a decision as to whether TPO 1393 should be confirmed or not. It currently exists in a temporary form and it will expire if not confirmed. That expiration will be in September, i.e. next month. And it's before the committee for consideration because we have received well over the 5 representations that are required to ensure that it can have public planning committee overview. But I do need to confirm what the decision doesn't have within its scope. So the question of whether a particular pruning operation should or should not be permitted to any of the trees that are proposed for inclusion in the TPO is beyond the scope of this committee item, which just focuses on whether it should be confirmed or not. These decisions on applications to prune or even remove protected trees in the future can come to committee in exactly the same way as this confirmation item, where the relevant number of representations or objections are received for a live application. This would be the process by which members could have input to anything that I might go on to refer to as being a pruning matter. When the committee considers a pruning application, in contrast to this confirmation decision, the debate would then reasonably consider the extent of the pruning requested, the reasons given for the work, and would then make their decision balancing the impact of the proposed pruning on tree health, and also would be able to pick up the resident experience of living alongside the tree. This decision again would be taken following consideration of an officer report, and we would provide arboricultural detail and an officer recommendation as for this current process, but the decision would most definitely lie with the committee. As background to this confirmation decision, this TPO represents a reserving of a previous order following a complaint to address issues of process, and it was the intention to create the opportunity for objection to be made. The reports make clear the officer intention to allow this decision about TPO confirmation to be taken afresh. It's important that we didn't want to unfairly influence this decision with previous application history. Ultimately, various reasons are given in the objections for not confirming the order, and these have been summarised and addressed in the reports as is customary, but I think some areas warrant further consideration, which I will come to. And I also want to make clear that there has been a significant number of additional representations received after those reports were written and are within the addendum report. So we have now had a total of 13 objections. And just for the benefit of the committee, I quickly made a table to summarise the points that have been raised in the objection and just to clarify the frequency to allow some grouping of those matters to be considered. This obviously is a significant level of objection, and it is certainly not disputed by officers that there is a strong local feeling about the trees. Looking at the frequency of the objections, then the most commonly cited objections are the unreasonable overhang of trees, which is essentially the same thing as the trees being considered to have an excessive size. There is a very clear fear of property damage arising from the trees, and there is a strong expression of the negative impact that the trees are believed to be having and are having on people's quality of life. So in terms of the elements of that are relevant to this particular decision and whether to confirm or not, the three main factors relevant to the confirmation of the TPO in the statutes are the visibility of the trees, the level of the impact that the trees have, and there's a category of other factors. And to ensure I focus on the most relevant ones in detail, which pick up on this confirmation decision, it's probably best that I focus initially on the quality of life aspect, because that was one that came out most strongly in the objections. Linked to the expression of quality of life and where this stemmed from is a tree policy review group, and that is a piece of work from 2006, which is cited regularly by the objectors. It's a little bit hard for me because I wasn't directly involved with that work, and we don't have officers still at the council looking back 17 years that were directly involved with that work. But I can pick up on the quality of life aspiration that comes out from the review report. And it largely, I think that report was focused on the negative impact that there was being received by some very large historic area TPO orders, which covered as a blanket large numbers of properties and picked up trees for protection regardless of their size or quality or their age, and picked up many trees that were very close to properties and weren't appropriate at all. This was recognised to be a significant burden on residents, and the work of the council, as far as I can see, led to the revocation of some significant big area orders. Other key aspects from that quality of life consideration, it was policy 1 within the review document. It said that quality of life was important. It clearly states that homeowners should have their views taken into consideration. And in order to enact that, I am aware that previous officers have incorporated quality of life measures into our tree assessment methodology. We call that TEMPO, and I'm proposing to take members through that TEMPO decision shortly to help with that understanding. Also, the process by which TPO confirmations come now to committee after a threshold of objections being met creates the opportunity for resident views to be considered and for this planning committee to provide oversight and debate. In terms of context for that tree policy document, policy 2 noted that TPOs should be subject to regular review, and it recognised that many TPOs that they looked at in 2006 contained inaccurate information, and that formed the bulk of the work that was done, I think, after that point, which was to build into business as usual the intention and the process of tackling inaccurate TPOs and making sure that where resources allow, that could be updated, and also changes were made to the process I'll take you through shortly to incorporate quality of life measures into the assessment tool. It's certainly not disputed by officers that quality of life is extremely important, but the committee is reminded that a TPO is only intended to ensure that reasonable decision making can be taken around tree pruning, considering both the needs of the tree and the residents. But to support the committee in their decision making, I'm going to include the tempo assessment for trees, if I can move that on. So it's in sections. It starts just with a clarification of what trees are under consideration. For the TPO that we're looking at, then we've got T1, which is an individual oak, and then G1, which is a group of 3 stems of oak trees in the different properties as shown previously by the map. The assessment tool moves on to look at amenity assessment, and we have on the left-hand column the item that's being assessed. We have tree T1. I'm pointing here at this diagram. I'm assuming my cursor appears on screen, but apologies if not. But there's a column T1, and then there's a column G1, which is the group of trees. So in the condition, we are able to choose from a category of good, fair, poor, dying, dangerous, or dead. They have descriptors of highly suitable, suitable, unlikely to be suitable, and 2 unsuitables there. And there are points allocated. And this is the theme throughout the document, in that each tree or group will accrue points, and it has to accrue a certain number of points to merit a TPO and be worthy of consideration. The tool looks at the remaining longevity of a tree in years. So for these trees, they were considered in terms of their condition. We're not aware of anything that affects the condition of the trees. So they have both scored good or highly suitable, and they've scored 5 points each in that category. They are an oak species and are considered to have a reasonable life expectancy of greater than 100 years. So they have scored 5 there. But if they were of a different species, or there were other issues that might affect their retention, then they would naturally have scored lower on those measures. The next category assessed is relative public visibility, and there are guidance text there. To score the highest category, a tree needs to be a very large tree with some visibility or prominent large trees. For the next category, large trees or medium trees clearly visible to the public. We didn't, in this situation, assess either of those top 2 categories to be relevant to these trees. And this is a point that's raised in the objections as to whether this aspect of the scoring has been done properly. So this is the category that we considered the trees fell into. We consider them to be medium trees or larger trees with limited view only. And that picks up the fact that it is a cul-de-sac, it's not on a main road. The trees don't have a particular footpath or other vehicle by which people are brought past. But in the context of that local street scene, they are visible over the tops of the roofs. There are limited other trees in the area. So we considered that that category of suitable and a score of 3 was appropriate in this instance. And for the benefit of the committee, you can see that the tool works by reducing the number of points. If trees are not visible to the public, they don't score highly, and they need to score much higher in other categories. So there's a threshold here when we reach other factors, where if trees have not accrued 7 or more points, they don't proceed and they aren't considered any further. Provided they have, then points can be awarded for other factors. If they are a principal component or an arboricultural feature or a veteran tree, then regardless of other aspects, they would score highly. Where trees are within groups that are important for their cohesion, they get given points here, and this is the first differential between the 2 trees, where the group of trees, where the stems have grown up in G1 to support each other and to grow up as a collective, then they have scored in that category. They've scored those 4 points. Where trees are of particularly good form, they can be assigned 2 points, and the single tree T1 is considered to have particularly good form in that setting, and that's why the 2 points have been awarded there. The next stage is expediency, which could be considered a risk factor score. And in the event there's a known immediate threat to the tree, then it scores highly, and then it gradually moves down to be much more minor. we have categorised that in the middle of that category, saying there is a perceived threat to the tree. And I think it's important that the committee is informed that, I should only talk about the facts, but our assessment is that there's no immediate threat of removal of these trees, but the threat, the perceived threat to the tree is that potentially if pruning is completed excessively, then it could harm the health of the tree. And being able to actually make sure that the tree's interests are considered in future decisions about tree pruning, how that perceived threat to the tree is assigned, to give a point score of 2 for each of those. Apologies, the text has got a bit small there, but the tree impact assessment starts to consider on the quality of life issues that have been brought forward from that tree policy review group. What was intended was, if the impact of the subject tree on the landscape is not significant, and if it wouldn't matter to the landscape that a particular tree was removed, then it shouldn't score as many points, because actually maybe a resident shouldn't suffer the imposition of having that tree as a protected tree, and that actually it wouldn't harm the landscape. So here, if there's a large amount of surrounding tree cover and the subject tree blends into the landscape, it scores low and only attracts a low number of points. Where we've got, in this case, we've got limited or obscured tree cover and subject tree is important to the landscape, it does score a little bit higher. And in this instance, the two trees have got 3 points each, because there aren't a great number of trees around there, and the loss of those trees would actually have an impact of removing greenery from that street scene. Proximity to nearest habitable structure. So in order to make sure that where trees are in close proximity to buildings, where those trees are going to need additional work, then it's reasonable that the trees lose points in their TPO worthiness as a result of that. So where the outer canopy is touching the building, but it's manageable, it loses 1 point. Where the outer canopy of the tree is likely to touch the building within a 3-year period with normal expected growth, it's considered manageable again, but points are taken off. Where the branches are touching the building, you can remove 2 points. If the major structure, so that would be the trunk or scaffold branches, are touching the building, then it loses 5 points. And not touching property, no issue, you would put 0. So the committee can see that the tree, in this instance, both the individual tree and the groups of trees, have lost a point in that area because they will need pruning, they will grow into proximity, and it is accepted that the eventual size of those trees will need to be controlled in order to prevent conflict with the buildings. An issue that's raised is shading and the light impact of trees. So orientation to the nearest habitable structure is considered by our TPO assessment. And as you might expect, where the tree is located to the north of the property and it doesn't shade, then there are 0 points. But for instance, where the group of trees is located to the south of the property, then it will accrue a penalty in terms of a -3 score. And the final process is to reckon up the number of points that a tree has achieved. And in this instance, T1 achieved 19 points and G1 achieved 18 points. And in our table, then the score of 15 plus would indicate that the tree definitely merits a TPO if it's considered to be expedient. I have included some pictures of the tree just for context. There was several valid points made that these photographs weren't the most current, and I would encourage the committee to envisage this tree in a slightly larger form to allow for growth and also to allow for the fact that there are leaves on the tree. Similarly, this tree, the reason we often with TPO assessments include winter images is because it's useful to see the structure of the tree. but also it gives a really good context to the setting if you can see trees over the top of the properties to just see how they might contribute to the street scene. There's a picture here that was available, and I was asked to clarify that these properties are in Fordwell Drive, I believe. So it's number 34 on the left-hand side with the G1 trees in the back garden, and this is the adjacent house. So in conclusion, the report states the officer view that these are valuable trees. They are considered to be sustainable with pruning in their locations. And the recommendation is that the TPO be confirmed as presented. But I will, at this juncture, with thanks for the time that's been afforded me to go through that, I'll hand back to the chair and see if there's any questions of fact.
Thank you very much, Officer. For that very full report, we needed to know all of the details. I think most of us went on the site visit on Saturday and were pleased to be able to see the trees close up. So have had a good look and we've all noted the concerns of the residents. Can I ask members for any questions, please? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. I would like to thank the officer first just for the very detailed inclusion in the report of a number of elements I had discussed with him prior to the meeting. This application is of significant controversy to residents in the ward of which I'm the member, and I've received significant comments from them. So I do appreciate the officer's efforts to make sure that their views are fairly communicated to the committee. That is much appreciated. In terms of specific questions, firstly, for planning applications, the officer's reports typically make specific reference to various relevant national and local planning policy documents where these are relevant to the case. I appreciate that TPOs are a little bit different, but it does strike me that such references are largely missing from this report, which has been submitted for our consideration. So I was just wondering if the officer could clarify for the committee the policy basis upon which the TPO is proposed and that the assessment's been made. Specifically, what are the relevant policy documents and any specific clauses within those documents which are relevant to the case and need to be considered?
Thank you. Would the officer like
Thank
to
you.
comment? Yeah.
So I think the first thing to say would be that within a planning context where planning policies are being considered, then the tree officers make separate considerations and have a process for giving tree comments into the planning process and for raising TPOs where it's considered expedient to that planning process. In terms of how the council's own policy affects the application of TPOs, then it really falls under the council's statutory duties as a planning authority to have due regard to the protection and preservation of trees in the conduct of their duties. So I'm not aware of anything in particular that is a specific policy other than the council has a tree strategy which sets out an overarching view of how important trees and woodland and hedgerows and orchards and everything tree related, how important that is to the borough as a whole. But in terms of the actual detail of the consideration of the TPO and a TPO merit, then it's based on expediency and managing any perceived threats to trees, and it's based on the statutory obligation to operate the TPO process in accordance with the TPO regulations.
Thank you. Another question, Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I may. So paragraph 4.8 of the officer's report makes reference to recommendations by the 2006 Tree Policy Review Group, and that you did lightly touch on that report and the work of the review group during the officer lightly touched on it during his presentation. It's my understanding that the report by this group was considered and the recommendations of that report were accepted by the executive in 2006. And therefore those recommendations are adopted policy, I believe. Residents have raised to me a number of points in relation to the content of that report and the guidance provided within that report. So I was just wondering if the officer or whether one of the other officers potentially is able to just clarify for the committee the position of that report and its recommendations within the context of the current policy framework that we need to consider here.
Officer Chan. Yeah. Could you comment on that, please?
I can. So that policy has shaped the way that we do the business as usual of the work of the tree preservation orders. So as I said in my report, then we modified the assessment tool that we use to assess whether a TPO is worthy. We have, in the past, it's before my time, but I'm aware that TPOs, as part of business as usual, were reviewed, and where appropriate, area orders were removed and individual and group orders were put in place. That's all in accordance with statutory recommendations that tree preservation orders should be kept under review. It is a challenging process and piece of work to keep up to date with. It's something that is resource dependent, and we would certainly do more work on that with additional resources. But in the context of the decision that's before the committee in terms of whether to confirm this TPO or not, I think the key documents are the tree strategy that we have in place now, which I would consider to be a document that brought forward and superseded and made current anything from 17 years ago, and the regulations of the TPO and the statute of the planning, the Planning Act.
Do you have any other comments to make, Deputy Chief?
No, I mean, other than to say, you were talking about planning policies. The planning policies that we refer to in planning applications are there as part of the local plan, and they are there to help us determine planning applications. We do have policies that support the protection of trees. I'm thinking particularly of EN1, of the SAFE policy from the old local plan, but they are not there to guide you in the making of TPOs. They're there to guide you in the treatment of trees through planning applications.
Thank you. Do you have any...
May I follow up, Chair?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. I'm still not entirely clear. I've got a clear answer on the standing of that document. The reason this is important is that there is specific guidance in that document that has been raised to me by residents that they believe has a significant bearing on the consideration we're making today. And I want to be clear that therefore the standing of that document. I do appreciate that we have a more recent tree strategy document. However, that document itself, when I reviewed it, specifically states, and I quote, "The tree strategy complements the existing legal, regulatory and policy framework. It does not have legal status and does not replace any existing policy." So, end quote. So if this 2006 report and the recommendations of this 2006 report are current policy, that the tree strategy supplements that, but it doesn't appear to replace that. So I think we need to be clear whether the recommendations of that 2006 report can have a bearing and need to be considered by the committee or not. I don't know that the committee can make a decision on this matter without clarity on that question at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Can I ask for a bit of guidance from our legal officer, please?
Sorry, I don't really know. What I've understood from what the officer has said is that what followed from that review has been taken into account in their strategy as to how they deal with TPOs, and he's gone through how that has been integrated into that assessment he had on the screen. I haven't had sight of this document, so I don't know what it says, but I'm accepting what the officer is saying, that whatever was recommended has been implemented in how they assess whether a tree should be protected.
Officer Chown, please.
Thank you. I didn't know whether it would be helpful or possible for me to ask what the items are that are within that policy review group that are considered to not be covered by the information in the report and by the process that we followed. That just might help me to respond more fully.
Just ask Councillor Smith if he could elaborate, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So there are two specific elements of the text of that report that I think, if it is valid to the considerations, are significant. The first, the report specifically discusses the impact of quality of life, and I understand that prior to 2006 that wasn't something that had a significant weight in the consideration of TPOs. And so there's quite a lot of text in the report that talks around the sort of bearing of quality of life issues on the consideration of TPOs. In particular, if I quote from the report, there is one section which reads, "It is felt that the quality of life issue should become an issue that merits consideration when determining what measures are applied to any particular tree, and that residents should have influence but not unqualified choice in such matters." So I do appreciate, sorry, ending the quote there, I do appreciate that the officer has spoken to this to some degree. I would just quite like to ask them if they could maybe expand on specifically how quality of life concerns have weighted the determination of their recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can navigate backwards in my presentation. So the information I have available to talk to in terms of the expressions that I have about how quality of life should be considered, I've summarised on this table. It's difficult because quality of life is a very hard term to define, and I think I said that in the report, and I believe that the 2006 report identified that as well. But when you look at the aspects, for instance, of shade, what one individual will consider to be a benefit of a tree in that it casts shade, another individual may consider to be a detriment of a tree in that it denies them sunlight. And I think that there is a limit to how far we will be able to go in adequately defining exactly what quality of life looks like in terms of meaningful, measurable actions that should be informing decisions we take about trees. For many people, it's a nuisance that trees drop leaves or acorns fall from trees, and all of those things that come with trees. They are significant quality of life issues, but within the TPO regulations itself, within the guidance that governs making decisions under the TPO regulations, then there is a recognition that the trees have a right to do the things that come naturally to them. They have the right to grow, they have the right to have leaves which will fall. Biodiversity has the right to be within those trees. And it is going to be incredibly difficult to legislate too far in terms of how we seek to make decisions about trees, largely because what is a significant issue for one resident may not be a significant issue or could be a benefit to a future resident. So I feel as though the work that's been done to incorporate the the quality of life measures that we can meaningfully look at within the Tempo tool has actually met the expectations of picking up quality of life. And I believe that the process that we have in place, whereby objections recorded will trigger the movement to bring matters to committee, also allows for resident voice to be heard. So I'm not sure that there is anything that is in that item that isn't already incorporated into the work that we're already doing with the TPOs.
Thank you. Do you have a further?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologise to the other members for hogging the limelight, Elizabeth, in this one, but as I said, I have had a significant number of representations from residents, and I want to ensure that their concerns are adequately addressed by the officer in the questions. The second element from that 2006 report, there's another section text where it talks specifically about applying TPOs to trees in private gardens. And specifically, the report recommends that, and again I quote, in order to give residents more choice about quality of life issues, it is suggested that tree protection orders will only be applied to private gardens when trees have high visual amenity value. End quote, which seems to imply that that would seem to apply, assuming this is current council policy, as per my questions, that if the tree is not considered to have high visual amenity value, that would essentially preclude it from being considered for a TPO, almost regardless of the Tempo score and other considerations with Tempo. That's certainly the view that's been put to me by my residents, and I'm not convinced currently that's so I don't want to move on to debate, but perhaps if I'd just like to ask if the officer could speak to, noting that these trees are located on a quiet cul-de-sac. They're largely visible only to residents, a significant number of whom have raised objections and have suggested that actually the tree's having a negative amenity impact on them rather than a positive. Can the officer explain how we've therefore determined that this is a tree of high visual amenity value, or that these are trees of high visual amenity value?
Officer Chan.
Not easily is the answer. Visual amenity is a subjective and individual view. So the Tempo tool goes as far as we can to categorise and give some sort of measurable rigour to something that is ultimately an individual perception. Some people are not bothered about having trees in their landscape. Some people really enjoy having trees in their landscape. So it's a really difficult measure to actually be categoric about or scientific about. But I think that the tool does actually provide a framework for assessing a tree, and it provides a defensible scoring mechanism for considering whether trees are visible and how significant the impact of individual trees are in the context of other trees that might be growing around them. But ultimately, you're correct in that were the planning committee to determine that the trees do not have amenity value or do not have sufficient visual amenity value to warrant a TPO, then that TPO would not be confirmed and it wouldn't be in place. So in that context, that process, that check and balance does exist. I would say that the idea that the trees don't have any visual amenity is not quite correct, and I don't think the representation of the public views was the same, because within the objection comments there was a number of reports that the trees are enjoyed, that the trees do add to the environment, and that there is no desire to remove the trees in the event that the TPO is not confirmed. But what's being said is that there is a greater desire to prune them and manage their size. So I'm not quite sure that the mechanism of justifying that a tree doesn't have visual amenity because there's a desire for it to be pruned more heavily is appropriate.
Councillor Reagan.
Chair, I'd like to ask the officer some more questions about this tempo assessment process. I've noticed that the summary is in the report, i.e. the number of points. And I wanted to ask, but the actual details of the report, of the tempo assessment, has been presented here today. And I wanted to ask, was that scoring system, the table that was presented, I assume that was available to residents and was in the public domain. Were there any specific objections that came from residents about the scores that were assigned in that table?
The tempo document isn't in the public domain. It's not a document that is shared. It's a document that's used internally in order to provide some rigour to the officer assessment of a worthiness consideration for a tree being considered for TPO. For clarity of the committee, then there's no reason why that can't be shared. For future process amendment, there's no reason why the information can't be shared. It's just never been shared previously that I'm aware of. If there'd been a request to see the tempo assessment, then we would have absolutely sent that out, but it's not something that's routinely published. I think further to this committee report, then it might be something that's useful to add as an appendix to future TPO confirmation reports if it's been useful to the planning committee. But prior to this, it hasn't been publicly shared.
Thank you. I think it has been very, very valuable to the members. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, if I may, about any concerns about subsidence. I think that needs airing. And then who can check on the health of the trees to avoid problems going forward?
So the issue of subsidence is beyond the scope of this decision that's before the committee for making a TPO, because the TPO would not prevent any work that was required to prune or that remove a tree that was shown to be causing subsidence of a property. What the TPO wouldn't necessarily allow for is the preemptive pruning of a tree in the event that there was no evidence or no indication that the tree was causing harm to a property. But in the event that there was a problem, then the TPO doesn't prevent any work being required to be completed. I would say that I think, yeah, I think it's beyond the scope of the facts that I can provide to the committee to determine, whether this particular TPO has a relevant subsidence issue. Certainly, it's not something that I'm aware of, but it is the facts. The reality is that the oak species is a high water demanding tree. It is within the range of potential influence of tree roots, but it wouldn't prevent reasonable work being completed to the tree if it was shown and demonstrated that that was needed as a measure to manage the water content of the soil and to mitigate risk from subsidence.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Reagan again, please.
Yes, so I have a question about the grouping of the trees. You said that was an important consideration in the tempo assessment regime. So this is a hypothetical question. Please understand that. So of the group of three, how much pruning could be applied to one or two of those trees before the other two or the remaining one was affected? I'm trying to understand how this grouping works in terms of the future care of these trees?
Yeah, I understand the reason for the question. What's been asked there is to have a level of arboricultural inspection and recommendation beyond the scope of what I think I can provide for you in this context without having inspected the trees in detail. That would be a matter for a professional tree inspector to consider if it came up, and if they put in a report any reasonable level of pruning that they thought was supported by the condition of the trees, then that could be considered through the TPO process, but it would be a pruning application process that would need to be applied to that decision. The principles that you've referred to are that we would be considering wind loading. If tree branches are being shortened and the wind loading is going to be very different to adjacent stems, that could be considered, but it's a level of arboricultural detail that's beyond the information I can provide to you at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? Can I go to Councillor Karen first, please?
I don't mind if the other questions asked first.
Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karen. I am close to the end of my questions, I promise. The tempo assessment contains an element which considers the suitability of the tree. And I don't know if you want to bring that slide up. When I have looked in my research in the build up to this and in response to points again raised to me by some of my residents, they have noted that in the tempo methodology, it discusses that where a tree has, and I quote, clearly outgrown its context, that would result in a 0 score in that element of the assessment. And again, the residents contend that the size of the tree, particularly as they haven't historically been able to been successful in applications to prune it, they contend that it has outgrown its context. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that and whether you would consider that it has clearly or has not clearly outgrown context, please.
Thanks.
I'm just making some notes so I can remember those questions to answer them. But so I think one point that's important to note is that the success or otherwise of previous applications is sort of outside of the scope of this determination as to whether trees warrant TPO or not. The detail of an application, I don't want to talk specifically about any of these applications, but in principle, tree officers can only determine applications they receive, and we don't often or don't always receive the applications we would like to receive and that we could approve. The application success is often dependent on the quality of information that they're presented with. And as a general principle, we don't always receive the quality of supporting information that we would like to receive with applications. So it's not appropriate to consider that success or otherwise of previous pruning applications in terms of considering what we would approve in future applications, and certainly not in terms of what the committee might want to approve if future pruning applications received a level of representation and came back to the committee.
Sorry, just through the chair, just by point of personal explanation, I just want to be clear, I wasn't suggesting the success or non-success of the previous pruning applications was significant to the consideration. It was more a question of, because they have not had success in some of their previous pruning applications, the tree has obviously continued to grow, and the feeling therefore is that at this point they believe it's outgrown the context.
Yeah.
And that was the point of that, rather than to try and bring the result of previous applications into the considerations.
Yeah. So in terms of the point that you raised second, which was about the trees that are outgrowing their context and subsequently would get a 0 score as being unsuitable in terms of their condition and context, that doesn't factor in the opportunity for reasonable pruning to manage the size of a tree. So in terms of precedent, there are a huge number of very large, very old, very valuable trees that are coexisting successfully with residential properties as a result of a reasonable management regime that controls the size of the tree. The officers recognise completely that the trees in their location require and would require in the future regular pruning, but that doesn't mean that they score a 0 in the tempo assessment. It just recognises that, like so many of the trees that we benefit from in proximity to our homes, they just require regular and routine pruning and regular and routine inspection in order to make sure that they are safe and well looked after and can provide benefit with minimum inconvenience.
Further questions? Councillor Smith.
Unless Councillor Carron wants to put his now.
Let's try. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, if I could. We visited this area and had a look at the situation and the trees. I can't speak for the others. They may like to comment, but it seemed to be clear to me that probably the main issue, if I was living there or looking to purchase a place there, was that there was actually a safety issue.
Is this going to be a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It needs to be quick.
Should it have been a pruning application that was put in here? Is that, and if so, can this not be resolved?
I'll let Stephen answer that. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
No, it's definitely the right nature of item. It needs to be a TPO confirmation item that we're considering today, because we needed to create the opportunity for objection and representation to this order. That's what this process has done. That's what we're considering. So it's the merits of the trees for TPO that's being considered in this item. On the subject of safety, regardless of whether a tree has a TPO or not, the landowner and the tree owner has an obligation to everyone to maintain that tree in safe condition. And the obligations aren't actually changed by the TPO, other than there is a requirement to make a free application for pruning. And in the event that a tree report demonstrates that work is required to address a defect with a tree or to improve the safety of the tree, then subject to that being in accordance with best arboricultural practice, then those applications would not unreasonably be refused. So the safety of the trees is actually an independent item from the TPO or otherwise.
Do you have a follow-on? Yes, Councillor Carron.
Safety of the trees, I was sure safety of the trees. I was referring to the safety of the people in the vicinity, i.e. their residents. So should we be advising that they should be making an application for pruning? We've accepted that these trees need pruning. Is this what I'm asking? Is this a confused situation, perhaps?
I would invite applications for pruning, absolutely, because an application to prune is the only way that the officer gets the opportunity to approve works that are considered necessary. Obviously, the caveat to that is that we would like applications to prune the trees to be supported by evidence relating to inspection of the trees, managing the issues with the trees, but ultimately, yes, the officers need pruning applications to follow from a confirmation, if the confirmation is made, in order that residents can be enabled to do a level of pruning. And previous applications that we've received, sorry, I've strayed beyond the scope of this report.
Thank you, Officer. Further questions? Councillor Reagan.
through the chair. So, question for the officer. So, you've answered my question, which is that there have been applications for pruning in the past. So, I think that would have been, don't you think, it's a question then, that would have been helpful in terms of assessing what residents want in terms of the future of those trees?
I made the decision that the committee would be better served by not having information from previous applications, which is potentially misleading. The desires of the residents is the most important thing, regardless of what applications have come and gone before, and also the consideration for the committee to make as to whether these are significant trees that warrant a justification for the level of pruning that they are receiving in the future. So there is a very significant risk that previous planning history would cloud the consideration of whether a TPO is worthy or not, which is the decision that's before the committee today. In the event that there was future applications to prune or remove the trees that came to the planning committee, then I would consider that it would be highly relevant to understand previous decisions. That would be an appropriate context for that. But the decision taken at this point was that it would be potentially prejudicial to the committee for officers to be saying what had happened with previous applications.
A question from myself, if I may. Just to reassure residents, could we say that the trees could be managed successfully for many a long year with pruning, so that they feel that there's no chance of a large branch toppling on top of them in the garden? You know, with the inspection for a pruning, spot that there is something up with the tree and keep it safe. Sorry, the legal officer would like to comment.
Sorry, Stephen, can I just say that the committee needs to consider the application before them. The application is for confirmation of a TPO, not a pruning application.
Thank you, legal officer. I'm concerned that there is a concern that we can't address if we don't ask that question. Any other questions? Councillor Reagan?
Yes, Chair. Obviously, the trees are growing and changing. So are residents able to have the tempo assessment redone at a future date to reassess any TPO decision?
In theory, yes, but I'm not sure to what end that would be done. But I'm just looking down the list of categories and what would reasonably change in terms of the TPO assessment and scoring. Potentially, if the remaining longevity of the tree was affected by a defect with the tree, if it developed an issue of some sort, there would be no need to review the tempo assessment, get the tree removed from a TPO, and then do works to remove the tree. The idea of the TPO is that the tree could be removed and a replacement tree would be recommended to be replanted to secure the landscape amenity in the future. Thinking of other areas where it might change, I don't envisage that the public visibility would change in this context. But yes, you know, in theory, we could certainly review this, but it would be more common to just, if the trees justify a TPO, then from that point onwards, the TPO allows for applications to be made without needing it to be revoked or modified.
Thank you. Councillor Penfold.
A question. If a TPO is put onto the tree, does that automatically mean that the tree people will go around and assess that tree? Or will they have to ask for it?
So the tree officers will only go out and assess the tree once they receive an application to prune the tree. We don't have any powers to go and require works to be done to TPO trees. We don't have any powers to advise or inspect trees on behalf of the public and make recommendations for them. The role of the tree officer, and this picks up to an extent on previous questions about safety, the role of the tree officer is to assess the information presented in an application for pruning works, to consider whether it is a reasonable balance of a work that's required and not harmful to the tree, and apply arboricultural best practice and make sure that that tree is being looked after as best it can in the course of making a determination for a specific application. So no, we don't automatically go out and look at trees once they're TPO'd. It's only if somebody makes an application or if we do a TPO review.
If a TPO is put on the trees, is there a sort of, just a comment generally that if you are worried about this tree, please ask for help?
We would love to provide a service where we inspected private trees and gave people reports, but that's simply beyond the scope of what a public official can do in terms of maintaining private trees. It would be a volume of work beyond that which we could achieve. So while the closest we get to that is if there is an application for pruning works and we sorry, I can hear other people talking in the background, but it's putting me off a little bit. But if we receive an application for pruning works and there are lesser works or different works that the officer thinks should be done to the tree, there is some scope for us to advise at that point, but within the context of determining a tree pruning application. We don't have the capacity to prune and, sorry, not to prune, to inspect and make works recommendations on private trees. That is a role that comes down to professional tree inspectors, and there's a whole industry of consultant tree inspectors who will provide those safety reports to residents.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have strayed away from the TPO application, but I think that it's all been extremely helpful for the background. Do you have a brief further question? Because we
I
need
have
to
one
wrap this.
final question. Thank you,
you.
Chair. It does relate to this conversation around pruning. I'm conscious of the advice the legal advisor was given us. Please interrupt me if I'm straying too close to the mark. But it does strike me that obviously a TPO does create an additional burden on the private landowner with regards to hoops they have to jump through when they're going to when they're hoping to get trees pruned. And I just want to make sure I'm clear and I understand the things that are considered in that. Specifically, the officer has talked about the reasonable applications to prune with advice should be successful, but how would that advice need to balance the various considerations between the impact of the tree on the quality of life of the residents versus the health of the tree? I'm considering particularly a tree without a TPO. If I were the landowner, that's my decision. The TPO obviously shifts that balance, and is it always the case that the health of the tree is absolutely paramount, or is there still some balance consideration there between that impact on the life of the residents versus the health of the tree in that situation?
Thank you. So the TPO does create a burden on the tree owner in the sense that there's extra processes required. However, the burden of getting a tree of that sort of stature regularly inspected does not change with the TPO. So the tree owner would be liable for anything that occurs to that tree as a result of their maintenance or otherwise on that tree. If the council has refused works that in retrospect were related to a safety issue, then obviously the council would at that point be implicated. But the core obligation is on the private tree owner to have their tree inspected. And once they're having those inspections done, then there's all of the evidence required to make submissions to do works in accordance with the safety reports. And then the tree TPO process, provided there's no discrepancies with that information, then they can make those determinations and approve that work. The area where the TPO does impinge on the resident and the tree owner's choices is where where a resident would prefer to do excessive pruning work or work over and above that required by the tree and its health and safety issues. Then there is a balance and a decision to be made. But in that context, there are two sources of protection for the resident. They've got the right of appeal to the planning inspectorate, who will send an independent advisor and an inspector to actually review the council decision, and they have the authority to overturn and award the permission that had been applied for or a version of that. There's also the oversight of the planning committee. So if there are 5 or more objections to a pruning application, then that also could come back to committee. And that could be the point at which a determination was made that the tree should give a bit more of its canopy in order to balance quality of life issues. But again, just to reiterate, that is a decision for a separate agenda item, and it is beyond the scope of this item, which is considering simply whether, with reasonable pruning, the trees that we're considering are worthy of TPO.
Thank you very much. One final question from Councillor O'Regan.
Yeah, I'm taking on board the advice about the scope of the decision. I think as councillors, I think I'm speaking for a number of us, we're trying to balance looking after trees and looking after residents. And I've understood, and my question is, so applications for pruning could come to this committee. I think I've understood that the answer to be yes. So my question is, applications for pruning, do they have the same equivalent system as the tempo assessment process, so that we can see what the decision making is and that decision making is available to residents to comment on and object or support as the case may be? Thank you.
So there is a process. It's more complex than the tempo process, and the application to prune gets put on the public portal. So there is public notification. We consult with the parish and town councils automatically. Further than that, yes, so the process allows for the application of British standards in relation to arboriculture. So what the officers will do in their consideration of the information is they will be checking whether the relevant British standards and best practice for looking after trees, whether they have been applied. They'll be checking whether the information provided about the health of the tree. They'll be checking the balance of impact on the tree health versus the benefits to the resident and the relationship with the land use adjacent. So it's more complex than the tempo system. There's no form that I could show you that would take you through that process, but essentially there is within the tree inspection world a protocol for how trees are inspected, how the condition of trees are assessed, and how works are demonstrated and justified. And the tree officers that consider that are qualified to make those considerations to determine whether the works being proposed are reasonable and provide a balance between the health of the tree and the aspirations that are given within the application.
Thank you very much. I think that's all questions, thank goodness. We've heard a great deal about not only TPOs, but the possibilities after the TPO is applied or not. The safety of the residents, the concerns of some about the health of the trees, the visual amenity of the trees and so on. So now I'd like us to consider the resolution on page 66. No, it's not. It's on 65. The resolution, the recommendation is to approve the TPO as set out and as discussed. Does anyone want to make any comments summing up? Sorry,
may I second the motion?
Thank you. Does anyone want to make any comments summing up what they've heard? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to state for the record that I am unequivocally pro-tree for any potential misinterpretation of the comments. I've raised a number of matters, particularly obviously as the ward member for this area, that my residents do have a lot of concerns, which is why I brought them up. I have an enormous oak over my back garden. It's a nightmare dropping all its acorns all over my garden, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I am just slightly concerned during the question there, this question around the 2006 report and its position in current council policy, that we've not had a clear answer to that, and I'm unclear. And I do think that's a significant question, because the statement, and I will read it again if that's okay, from that report, which states that in order to give residents more choice about quality of life issues, it is suggested that tree protection orders will only be applied to private gardens when trees have high visual amenity value. And I think until we're clear on that consideration, I'm concerned, until we're clear whether or not that specific guidance is policy or not, I'm worried as to whether we can fairly make a decision on this, Chair. And I would like to suggest that perhaps the appropriate action may be to defer the decision until we can get advice on that.
One moment, please.
If it helps. I mean, I think the situation is you've got something that was adopted as a council policy, which was there to serve a purpose at the time. From what we've been told by the officer, things have moved on. The findings of that report have been incorporated into current process. But what I would say is that it hasn't been adopted as a planning, a statutory document in the way that something like a local plan would be. Therefore, you're not required to have regard to it in the same way as you would be with the local plan, where you are required to have consideration to the development plan. It's not part of that process. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I think in light of that response from the Assistant Director, I would withdraw that suggestion. Then I'm happy with that response. Thank you.
Thank you. So anybody else? Oh, Councillor Collins, sorry. Yeah.
I also read this tree policy review group document from 2006. I'm disappointed, and it probably wasn't taken into consideration then, that we don't consider climate change and biodiversity as part of the process of looking at TPO trees, because clearly these magnificent oaks do have a mitigating impact on climate change and reducing temperatures in the urban environment, and also a huge impact on biodiversity. I mean, they're capable of supporting so much nature and wildlife. It's probably not relevant for today, but I do wonder whether it might be possible in the future to review the whole process and update it for now.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Any other comments? Personally, having visited the site and seen these trees, I have to say they look very healthy and they are lovely trees. And the group, especially, and the canopies are quite high, so there is sunshine in the garden. It must be very annoying that there's loads of stuff coming off the trees. But the group, I think, groups of trees do sort of exist in, what's the word, together. There's a symbiosis, perhaps, of a group of trees. And this is that struck me as quite amazing, but unfortunately in a very enclosed space. I would hate to see these disappear. I would love to see them maintained. Other than that, anybody else to speak? No? Oh, Councillor O'Regan.
Yeah, so just to sort of summarise that line of questioning I had through the chair. So, yeah, in future I'd like to see this tempo methodology, available to residents to comment. So we've got sort of full disclosure on the process. I'd also like to see a similar methodology set out for pruning. So as councillors, we were able to balance looking after trees, which are clearly very valuable for all the reasons that have been outlined, but also the residents' interests are also weighed in the correct way through our democratic processes. If you look at the tempo methodology, I mean, this is a very interesting use case. I think the methodology and the scoring should be open to comment by residents and councillors. I won't go into the detailed scoring, but I think that's my point really, which is I think these very important decisions. I'd like to see more openness and inclusion by residents, so we as councillors can balance this very difficult balancing act between looking after trees and looking after residents.
Thank you, Councillor O'Regan. Anybody else want to comment before we go to the vote? So this motion the motion to recommend has been moved and seconded. May I have a show of hands for the vote, please? In favour, sorry. And those against? And abstentions, please. 3 abstentions. The motion is carried. Thank you very much.
If I may, Chair, can I request, as I believe I'm able under the procedure rules for my individual vote, which was an abstention, there to be recorded in the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.